Sonic the Hedgehog. In the year 2006. Sonic had a rough transition into everything, I guess. I'm not 100% sure where we are in the whole nostalgia cycle and whether or not Sonic is good right now, or was always good, or whatever in terms of current internet culture. I'm too terminally offline for that these days. This YouTube channel is more or less my only window into online discourse. But we were all there in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Well, most of us were, at least, where shitting on Sonic was the norm. You've all heard it. Sonic had a rough transition into 3D. Even I got in on it with my own long-form analysis poking fun at that rough transition line. Like a decade late, but hey, I made it. That line of thinking has always confused me though. As rough as its edges are, and as unkind as time has been to it, Sonic Adventure is still worth playing. And back in its day, I remember it being very well liked. Sure, it wasn't Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time levels of sticking the landing, but it's not like Sonic Adventure has ever been this terrible abomination. And Sonic only got better from there. Adventure 2 has aged much better than its predecessor. I think it's unironically a great game to this day. I will die on that hill. Then Sonic Heroes follows it up quite nicely. Sure, it has some structural problems, like having to replay the damn thing 4 times, but it's a really fun romp with some great levels. Honestly, things seem to be going pretty good for Sonic in 3D. I don't really see the problem. And I still haven't recovered. Flop after flop after flop after flop. For years, Sonic Team was absolutely drowning us in garbage, pulling us up for air with Colors and Generations, only to proceed to waterboard us for another decade with hits like Boom and Forces. Like I said, I don't know where we are in the nostalgia cycle right now. For all I know, within a few years we'll have Gen Alpha 20-year-olds standing in front of green screens talking about how Sonic and the Secret Rings is actually a misunderstood masterpiece. But nothing will ever convince me that any game from this era is anything but mid at absolute best. Except you, Unleashed. But you're on thin fucking ice. Late 2005 to 2007 was the apex of this disastrous era, with some of the worst games in the series' history. I'm talking Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic 06, Sonic 1 GBA, Secret Rings, some real stinkers. This stinky stretch right here was unquestionably the darkest dark age of all of Sonic's many dark ages that, ironically, make up most of his existence. And right there, smack dab in the middle of it, Sega dropped this absolute masterpiece, only for everyone to shit all over it for years because it was the cool thing to do. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Sonic Riders. Now, like I said, hating on this game was the cool thing to do for a while. Basically, the whole idea was,
Sonic? A hoverboard? But he's already fast on foot, that's so stupid.
My retort to that is, who the fuck cares? This game is actually really fun. Sonic Riders has a simple premise.
Sonek Skeytbord!
Yeah, you just race around on hoverboards as Sonic characters. It does seem like kind of a weird direction to take a Sonic racing game at first, but it's executed so well that it just works. And you know what? I think the more out there premise is actually to its advantage. Most mascot racing games are pretty generic. You basically just take the cast of any given series, throw them in some karts, and have them race around some themed tracks. Even the gold standard mascot racer, Mario Kart, isn't trying to be anything more than the Mario racing game. Yeah, it does it extremely well and with an incredible level of polish, but Mario Kart's identity is simply Mario's identity, but as a racer. And even Sonic's newer racing endeavors are no exception. On the contrary, Sonic Riders feels so incredibly distinct from anything else in Sonic's library, and racing games in general. This uniqueness is put on full display the moment you boot up the game. The opening is this really sick stylized 2D animation, a far cry from the usual pre-rendered 3D intros of Sonic's Dreamcast and GameCube era. You can even watch Tails almost die in a high-speed collision. The game's whole style is striking. The artwork shows characters in dynamic poses and really cool racing outfits covered in sharp angles and high-contrast shading. The main menu is full of moving parts. Every sub-menu has this really high-tech, futuristic feel to it. And the sound design. Holy shit, the sound design. The main menu music is so energetic, it perfectly encapsulates this game's vibe. Hell, it defines it. But it's not just the music, everything about the UI sound design is incredible. The sound effects for selecting, going back, and even just moving your cursor are so damn snappy and satisfying. It feels like you're ordering something expensive on a high-tech terminal. It has that late 2000s, this will be video games in 2015 feel. And I mean that in a good way, it's very earnest about it. Obviously there's more to a game than just menus and artwork. The best UI in the world couldn't save something that feels bad to play. Thankfully, Sonic Riders feels more than just good in the hands. It's incredibly fast and obnoxiously fun. Races begin behind an electrically charged starting line as a timer counts down from 5. The moment this timer starts, you have full control over your character. You can back up, run forward, move side to side. It's up to you to position yourself where you want to be when the timer ends and the starting line opens. The faster your running start, the faster you rocket off on your board, and you can get a really decent lead if you cross at high speed as soon as the line drops. But if you go too early, even by a frame, you'll end up getting zapped and have to start way behind. It's a delicate risk-reward balancing act. It takes a lot of practice to get consistent at it. Making the starting line so dynamic and engaging is such a great design decision. The game is already interesting before the race has even begun. When the race actually has begun though, you'll find it gets even more exciting. The first thing you'll notice is that Sonic Riders is fast. Speed is the name of the game here. Maintaining your speed, while finding ways to temporarily boost yourself above it as often as possible, is the main way to get ahead. One really unique thing about Sonic Riders is that there's no acceleration button, and you don't need to hold forward. The game accelerates and maintains your speed for you. It's all gas, no brakes. Okay, there are brakes, but it's still all gas. You definitely aren't on rails though. While the game moves forward for you, your job is to steer, drift, boost, attack opponents, collect rings, and manage your resources. The game takes care of the monotonous part for you, and this frees up more of your bandwidth for more complex actions. That resource management I mentioned is critical to focus on. Your air tank is what allows you to do just about everything in this game, even just going forward. It's constantly dropping over time, and basically any action aside from just steering will use even more of it. This means that racing is about more than just steering and finding the right lines. The most successful racers are the ones that can maximize their air economy, keeping themselves boosting as often as possible and having enough air to execute tight drifts. There are a few different ways of getting air. The least efficient way would be stopping at a pit stop, which holds you in place as your air refills. This is really only for emergencies, like if you somehow completely run out. The first way you actually want to refill your air is through shortcuts designed for specific character classes. Flying characters can utilize these aerial boost rings to fly over parts of the course. Speed characters can grind on rails, and power characters can cause mass property damage. While doing any of these, your air will quickly refill. Then there's leveling up. By collecting rings, you can level up to level 2 and 3 at 30 and 60 rings respectively, which increases your stats, your maximum air, and the effectiveness of your attacks while completely refilling your air. Unless you get hit or fall off the track though, you can only level up twice. So while this is effective, it's not enough if you want to constantly maximize your air efficiency. This leads to the most consistent way you'll be refilling your air, and also the way with the most depth, the trick system. There are numerous ramps in every track, and when you fly off of one, you're given full control to flip, pivot, and turn your character however you want for the entirety of your airtime. Doing more complex tricks with more movement will net you more air upon landing, but you have to be careful not to get too ambitious, because if you don't land straight, you'll slip and lose speed while barely gaining any air. You also need to consider the lead up to the ramp, as holding down the A button will charge your jump and give you more freedom to do tricks. But if you charge too long, your board will slow down. You need to find the sweet spot to get maximum charge with no speed loss. And then you have to think about where you let go of your jump and what direction you hold when you jump, because that affects where you land, which can put you on different paths depending on the track. Holy shit, all of this to think about just for jumping. This is a button press in Mario Kart 8. But that right there is the beauty of Sonic Riders. Yes, there's a lot to think about and a lot of mechanics to master, making for a high skill ceiling, but ironically, with all of its depth, the game still manages to be so simple that the skill floor is also very high. It's the perfect game to play with little bro. Like I mentioned before, the game moves forward for you, and while there are plenty of mechanics to think about, if you don't think about them, you can still finish the race just fine. There are a significant chunk of tracks in this game that will literally beat themselves if you cross the starting line and immediately unplug your controller. This accessibility means that despite the game having incredible depth to explore and lots of cool things to master if you want to, it's not frustrating for those who want the more casual experience. Sonic Riders is a fantastic racing game in that way. There's even more to do than race with friends though. Sonic Riders is hiding a surprising amount of content for what it is. First of all, there's a story mode with two different stories, Hero and Babylon. It's kinda like Sonic Adventure 2, but much stupider. Hero's story follows our usual trio getting involved in a World Grand Prix being hosted by Eggman. The entry fee is a Chaos Emerald, and the winner supposedly gets all 7. Naturally, Sonic decides that gambling with these 7 insanely powerful artifacts with possible world-ending power is a fantastic idea. The plot is pretty standard fare for a racing game. You've got racing, rivalries, some banter, car bombs, the usual stuff, it's all here. Babylon's story follows the new characters created for this game, Jet, Wave, and Storm. It's more or less the exact same story, racing through the Grand Prix, but with alternate versions of the tracks. There's even a final boss fight at the end of the Babylon story against a genie. You know, 2 nickels and all that. When you finish story mode though, there's still more single-player content to work your way through in the form of mission mode. It seems really interesting at first, repurposing each racetrack as a staging ground for 5 different missions, like collecting items, doing impressive tricks, grinding on rails, or assaulting law enforcement. But to be honest, this mode quickly loses its luster. There are 5 missions for every single course. Most of them are brain dead easy. Some of them are crazy difficulty spikes for no reason whatsoever, and all of them are repetitive. And just when you think you're finally done, the game throws yet another set of missions at you that end up being just as repetitive. Damn. I was really highly praising this game before, but after making my way through this absolute slog of a mode, I think I might have to reconsider. Maybe Sonic Riders really isn't all that good of a game. So turns out, Sonic Riders is actually the best game I've ever played. That's right, for completing mission mode, you get a set of Sega-themed guest characters, including Ulala from Space Channel 5, Knights from, Knights, and most importantly, Ai Monkey Ball himself. Seriously, this brings me so much joy. There's nothing quite like watching Mr. Monkey Ball flying through the air on a banana hoverboard, smashing through cars and stone walls with his bare fists and sheer chimp strength, and running people over in his ball at what are kind of terrifying speeds. Seriously, imagine you're going 80 down the highway, and you just see this barreling towards you in your rearview mirror. That is a primal fear. And the unlockables don't stop there. There are tons of characters you unlock just for beating story mode, like Cream, Shadow, Rouge, and Eggman. Mission mode awards you with additional boards you earn by collecting junk for parts. There are 6 additional racetracks you get just for progressing through the game, most of which I consider to be amongst the best the game has to offer. And as you're doing all of this, every ring you collect goes towards purchasing new boards, skates, and bikes from the shop, all of which have appealing designs and interesting playstyles. Seriously, just scrolling through this shop used to mesmerize me as a kid. There are so many unique options that do different things and are really visually distinct. I think the unlockables are a sprinkle of magic that ties the whole game together. The courses are great, the music is fantastic, the gameplay is fast and fun, and there's plenty of content to go around. But the unlockables are there to drip feed you constant new things to try out, rewarding you tangibly for your playtime. So with this absolute gem of a racing game on their hands, brimming with polish, inspiration, and content, what did Sonic Team decide to do with Sonic Riders? Well, they killed it, of course. This series has been MIA for almost 15 years now, and I'm not confident in its return, given that it seems to have been replaced by the likes of Sega All-Stars and Sonic Team Racing. Honestly though, even well before its disappearance, it was already dead a long time ago. There are 3 Sonic Riders games, and to be honest with you, the original is the only good one. Some people like to cope and say that Zero Gravity is okay or pretty good, and yeah, it's not terrible, but it's extremely dumbed down and takes the game in a whole new direction that works nowhere near as well as the original. And Free Riders, well, you all know how that turned out. But even with modern voodoo modding magic removing the Kinect from the equation, Free Riders would still only be a 5 out of 10 at best. Sonic Riders, with its complete and total death on arrival and the defiling of its legacy in its sequels, is honestly one of the greatest tragedies in video game history. It dropped at the worst time possible, the same year as Sonic 06 and Sonic 1 GBA, right after Shadow the Hedgehog and right before Secret Rings. It never stood a chance in the court of public opinion, completely doomed by its peers. For years and years on end, as early YouTube critics lobbed criticism at Sonic's greatest failures, Sonic Riders caught stray after stray as the stupid Sonic hoverboard game. They threw kick after kick into the then dying horse of Sonic Riders' allegedly stupid content and low quality, never stopping to realize that the horse they were beating was actually a hologram, and the real horse was grazing safely out of reach, alive and well, unkickable in all of its live equine glory. I'm glad we as a society have moved past dunking on this game, and that people have begun to acknowledge its relative quality. I've been recommended more than a few videos about how unfair the world was to this game, but you know what? I think Sonic Riders deserves better. We should do more than just let this horse live. I think it's high time we fed it a few well-deserved carrots. Sonic Riders is a fantastic game, and if it had a few more entries that actually built upon it rather than more or less restarting anew each time, it could have been refined into one of the racing greats. But it's not too late. Sonic Riders may be dead in the water for now, but as we all know, in the era of endless reboots, remakes, sequels, and remasters, nothing dies forever. To quote the cinematic masterpiece Star Wars The Last Jedi, no one's ever really gone. With luck, we may one day be able to quote the even more masterful cinematic masterpiece, The Rise of Skywalker. Somehow, Sonic Riders returned. Sega and Sonic Team had this really great habit of listening to the fans about 0.012% of the time. Maybe, just maybe, if we can all just give Sonic Riders a chance, if we can all start talking about it, really let them know that there's interest for the series to return in all of its glory, we can slither our way into being that 0.012%. But in order to do that, we're going to need a leader. Someone we can trust to guide our campaign for Sonic Riders' glorious return. Someone with the credentials, the power, and the know-how to get it done. It is with this in mind that I, Soda Crab, would like to officially endorse Jet the Hawk as the Crustacean Party's nominee for the office of President of the United States. Mr. Hawk, the floor is yours.
My fellow Americans,